Get him, guys! Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Field Facts with Forrest. I'm your host, Forrest Carpenter. Now, with hunting season wrapping up, just a few tail end snow geese still hanging around, it's finally time for us to sit down and start compiling all the video and pictures and everything we've taken that may not have necessarily made it into a video or a post right off the bat. We also reached out to everybody in the Dive Bomb Facebook fan page, and we had a cool post Asher threw up there, asked people what they'd want to talk about. And in conjunction with sitting here going through all this footage and all these pictures, one question really stood out to me, and that was, how do you go about fixing things when they go wrong? As everybody knows, we spend a lot of time on the road, and we sure do get in on some great hunts, but that doesn't mean that all of them are like that. In fact, I would say the majority of the hunts that we go on are actually mediocre to very difficult. So don't think that we're out here and we're just some waterfowl rock stars who get it right every single time. We struggle just like everybody else. But one of the things that I've always thought separated good hunters from great hunters is your ability to adapt and deal with difficult hunting conditions. All right, so I want to spend some time today talking about how to read the birds and how to interpret what may be going on, what I can do to improve the hunting, and in what order that I like to make those changes, okay? So the first thing that I want to touch on is how to read some of these birds. We've all seen it. You go out someplace, birds are just flying sky high, or they're just flying over and they're not even looking. Birds are locked in formation, nothing's moving around, they're not peeling off to come take a look at you, they're not craning your heads. In this scenario, some days it's just better to ride it up till you win some, you lose some. Give them a salute, say, I'll catch you next time. You may be in the wrong spot. You may have too small a spread. They may not even see you based on the contrast between your decoys and the field. And just so you know, I'm going to talk about all of this in regards to primarily goose hunting. I may highlight a couple scenarios for duck hunting in particular, but since most of you are into goose hunting, and it seems to be the one where we can control the most based on what we do, that's where I'm really going to focus my attention today. Now, those birds that are going over, not even looking at you, like I said, wave at them, say, I'll get you next time, we'll come around, try something different, try something someplace else, maybe getting under that flight line at a different position between the roost and where they're going, or if you can get to where they're trying to be, obviously being on the X is ideal. That being said, when you do see birds starting to break off, you get a couple that'll spin out, you may pull some singles down, that's when I start realizing, okay, cool, we're in the game, birds are interested potentially in being here, if for no reason other than we've got a bunch of decoys down here. Running traffic, this is typically the scenario. You start seeing birds break, and typically if you can break a couple, you got a really good chance of bringing the whole flock. But how those couple birds that break becomes very, very important. How they react, I should say, and how they end up working the spread makes a big difference. If you get a bird that kind of breaks off and then they join back up with the group 5 seconds later, they give it kind of a questionable look, you're a lot less likely to pull birds, especially when they're stacked up and strung out a ways behind. If you can pull a single off one of the lead groups, all those groups behind it are going to see that bird go, and you're going to have a greater chance of pulling a bird. But if that bird's only moderately interested, you're going to have some difficulty. So obviously the goal is to decoy a whole bunch of birds, or just decoy birds closely. It doesn't have to be a whole bunch. The biggest thing that I want to talk about today is being able to recognize when you need to fix something immediately versus trying some things here or there. When there's definitely something wrong versus when there's something that may or may not be out of your control. The biggest thing that I look for when I'm working birds is how they react when they start to work the spread. When they're coming down and they're circling maybe at that 50, 60 yard mark, or maybe they're actually getting down low and it looks like they're going to finish, but they just kind of meander their way through without giving us a real good shot. but not flaring. This being the dramatic or the most important key. When a bird is not flaring, and I mean pulling back, trying to get away, that tells me that there's likely something small that I can adjust, whether it's calling, flagging, something with the spread, maybe just little things here. There's something that's just a little bit off. That tells me that's a slow down, maybe try a little bit different approach sort of thing. When birds flare, I don't care if it's at 200 yards or if it's at 20 yards, I know that they see something dangerous. And when they see danger, typically it's either a big shadow or the outline of a person or something very apparent like, who knows, maybe a truck just behind us, parked in the wrong spot. We got to go adjust that. Maybe a piece of tinfoil blew in some heavy winds. Who knows? But that's the biggest difference. When birds aren't flaring, I'm going to start kind of slowly making adjustments, trying a few things here or there. But when birds flare, out of the blind, go take a look, try and figure out what's going on. Now, you've seen plenty of hunts where we're lying in the spread, we get some wind, everything's working really well. Those days are really awesome. One of the times where I see birds flare that I may not have a whole lot of control over it is on a no-wind day while lying in the spread. And that's something that while I have had a few good hunts and, we've shared some of that stuff with you guys, while we've had some good hunts that way, the majority of the hunts where we're lying in the spread without wind, it just doesn't go well because you don't have motion, you don't have anything to keep the attention of the birds elsewhere other than right where the noise is coming from. The wind isn't there to throw the calling at all. It's very difficult to divert the bird's attention. So birds flare a lot. That's one where you'll pop up, you take a look, maybe try and mix some more silhouettes in around you and do your best to be hidden. But typically that's going to be one of the hardest scenarios you can have, especially for those of you in the Central Flyway or who hunt either tilled fields, or I was thinking winter wheat right off the top of my head. Hunting winter wheat without a good edge, especially on a no-wind day, is one of the most challenging circumstances there is. So the best thing to do is try to set things up so the attention is off of you. Another time when birds are flaring, say you're hunting out of a blind, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to come out, and natural vegetation is one of your biggest friends. I want to have as much of that stuff as I possibly can around us, whether it's in the dark or whether we have to go make another run in the daylight if birds are flaring. But I want to make sure that the outlines of all the blinds are hidden, and whether that's us lying in layouts or under ghillie blankets or in an A-frame, all of the outlines need to be broken up and look fairly natural. Now, I'm not saying you can't get away with some stuff. I've seen a lot of birds killed in situations where the hide was very apparent, and that's awesome. I'm not going to complain about it. That's always a wonderful deal. But again, this is about when things are going wrong. So don't take it personally. If you're a guy that loves your A-frame that's unbrushed, that you've had success out of, that's great. Keep it up. But when things aren't going right, that's the first thing I turn to. When birds are flaring, the first thing I do is look at the hide. Are we hidden? Can you see the edges? Can you see the outlines? Is there a shine coming off of something? Maybe it's a camera lens. Are we looking at the refraction of the sunlight on the camera? Are we looking at faces? There's all sorts of stuff, and especially the more guys you hunt with, the more difficult it can be to tell. Now, on the flip side, sometimes it is easier to hide when it's A-frames. The more of them, the more natural it looks. So just kind of a little bit counterintuitive. But long story short, when birds flare, it's something wrong. Get out of the blind. Go take a look. Look back around. Get as close as you can to the perspective of the birds when they flare. Now, if they're over top, obviously it's probably going to be something when they get up above you, they can see into the blind, something like that. And you may not be able to see that from the ground level. But if they're out there 60, 70 yards at a little bit lower angle, go out, walk out around where they are. You may very well have a decoy that's knocked over, or have a goose that's belly up, or a big piece of trash that just doesn't look right. And late season birds, especially if they've been heavily pressured, they're really, really tentative to go in and really commit to stuff. So the slightest thing could make the biggest difference, okay? When it's not flaring that birds are doing, again, back to the original scenario where they're just kind of milling around and there's some interest, but something's just not quite right. There's kind of an order in which I go through things. And I try to start from the smallest fix and the easiest fix, then moving to the more difficult, more time-consuming, bigger fixes and bigger adjustments in your spread, your calling, that sort of thing. So the first thing that I do, and there's really two that I can work on, and again, keep in mind we're talking about goose hunting here, but something you can adjust mid-flock is your calling. So if you get birds to break down, you're riding them really hard, and you're just blowing your call until you're blue in the face, you might get birds to break. It works really well often to break birds with a whole lot of noise. Say you're working them all the way down and then they start to kind of hang up there at 60. You're still blowing really, really, really hard. Change it. If you feel that it's not working and the birds have lost any sort of interest, it's time to start looking for a fix. So don't get in a rut. Don't feel like just because you had to use a lot of volume to break them that you necessarily have to do it to keep them. On the other side of that coin, if birds came in, started looking, and they're just hanging and you're being real quiet, sometimes it does take a little bit more. Let them get on the corners and hit them a little bit harder. If they react well to that heavy calling, maybe try being a little bit more aggressive with them and working at them the whole way in with just a little bit harder calling. But regardless, going and adjusting your speed, the volume, and the pitch of your calling can make a big difference. Even just changing from a real deep honker call to a lesser call can make a dramatic difference, even when you're hunting the same subspecies. You could be hunting big honkers, and both Kyle and I are really big fans of using higher pitched calls for big geese, just because of the way that tone frequency carries, and it seems to be very, very effective with them, even those big, deep-voiced geese. It's amazing how well you can do with a call like that. So if you're sitting there blowing your honker call, look, and you're not getting much of a response, grab that half breed or grab that lesser call and really rip at it. Look. Doesn't even have to be speed, just high and sharp. Look. Just something a little bit different and see if that works. You can make those adjustments on the fly. It's something that, while it takes time to master multiple calls and to be able to build your vocabulary, to build your range and your dynamics as far as speed and pitch, it's something that you can do in the middle of working geese to have an effect on things. That's about the smallest fix there is. The next one that I do, I start playing with the flag. Sometimes you'll go out and you'll have those days where if you're not flagging, the geese aren't coming. And I mean that literally. As soon as you put that flag down, they start to level off and lose interest. Sometimes you got to flag them all the way to the ground. Other times you get times where birds are working out there. They get out to that, 60, 70 yards, starting to make that last turn, looking just right. And you think, oh yeah, watch this. I'm gonna give them a little something with that flag. And as soon as you pick that thing up, boom, they just flare, and it's a no-no. So you can kind of adjust and you got to play with that and just see how that is. You got to feel that out. But both your calling and your flagging can be adjusted very quickly. If they really like it, keep at it. If they don't like it, stick that thing in the pit or the blind. That's the best thing about our super flag. You take that thing, boom, hit it on the handle, folds up, you can put it away. You can put it together right away too, stick it right back out the blind and try it on the next flock, because I've found that flagging is something that is very flock to flock. You do get some days where it's just broad spectrum across the board, loved it or hated it. Same thing with some of the calling, but it is very much a flock-to-flock scenario. And these are minor adjustments that it just takes some playing around with and feeling out to find out what works best for you in your area with the birds that you're hunting for that time of year. Now, much beyond that, we're starting to get a little bit more invested. After you've adjusted the way you're calling at birds and the way you're flagging them, you know they're seeing you, you know they're hearing you, you start thinking about what aren't they liking? What can I do to either redirect them or give them more comfort and confidence in the scenario. Now this comes down to quite a few things, and there's things where late season, late December, January, and February birds, they can be really, really tough. They can be sticklers with trucks and trailers. They can be weird about pivots. They can be weird about farm equipment that's set up. So you got to be conscientious of this kind of stuff. I start looking, again, always at the hide. Even if they don't flare, something could just look out of place. It doesn't have to be an aggressive flare to tell you that something could be wrong with where you're hiding, and that may be why birds are staying on the outskirts of your spread, staying on the downwind edges, or if they swing upwind, they stay behind you. They may very well notice your hide and be trying to avoid it. Now, you can do a few things in this circumstance. Obviously, the best scenario is finding a way to hide better, whether that's just adjusting the camouflage you've already gotten. Maybe your blinds were brushed up and everything was going great at the beginning, but after a few times shooting, some of the grass has come off the lids of your blinds or come off the top of your ghillie blankets, and all you got to do is stick that right back on, back at it, game on. You're back to really just getting right intimate and up close and personal with these birds. If you're able to hide better somewhere else, that's the biggest thing. In my mind, as a waterfowler, being hidden is my first priority. I guess maybe second. You have to be under birds, whether it's running traffic or on an X. You have to be in the vicinity of birds. But right after that, if you can't hide, it's not worth doing. So make sure that you put all sorts of effort and time into your hide before the hunt, knowing that you want it to look really, 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 really good in the dark, because as soon as that sunlight comes up, it's going to look a little bit off. And there's going to be something that the sunlight exposes that makes it just a little bit different. The angle of the light, it's always a little bit trickier to judge. So when you feel like you're doing okay in the dark, you're probably not. When you feel like you're doing really good in the dark, you're probably doing okay. Always have a little bit of extra brush. That natural vegetation is your best friend, and anything that you can have out there that's the same color and the same texture as what you're trying to hide in is going to help. If it's not going to be very similar, almost alike, sometimes those big tumbleweed hides, and I know you guys in parts of the country don't have this option, but something that stands out that's so dramatically different, can actually be used as a hide. So we'll talk more about alternative hides here, later on in another episode. But long story short, what I'm saying is just because birds don't flare doesn't mean that your hide is perfect. You can always adjust that and make sure that your buddy Jeff, 3 guys down, has a blanket all the way over his head, or isn't sitting there with his head and neck sitting out of the top of his layout blind, sitting there staring at birds. Might not even be a person. I don't know if you've looked at your dog, but my dog is solid black. And turns out black is something that is very easily seen. That's why I use black and white decoys. But it's also very difficult to hide. So if you can't get your dog in your blind or in the blind, that may very well be it. They could even see the head sticking out. So make sure your dogs are nice and steady in the blind, or if they're in the blind with you, like in a layout scenario or under a blanket, that can be really awesome too. Just make sure that you're keeping an eye on it. I know that there was one day I was hunting and everything seemed fine. Birds were working up really close, and they'd get within about 50, 60 yards, and they'd be starting to center up and come in, and then they'd kind of work around, and they'd work their way behind us and then freak out, which was kind of interesting because I felt like we were really well hidden from behind. Well, what I didn't account for is as birds were working, Lila, who my veteran dog, she's 12 going on 13 now. She's been with me through thick and thin and been really awesome, but she loves birds, just like all of them do. So birds would work up close and she'd hide, and I'd see her head come down. What I didn't see is her tail sitting back there wagging, and it was moving the blanket and kind of getting things moving a little bit too much. So once we got that sorted out, got a little bit of extra brush on there sitting loosely on top and hit her tail, everything was just fine. It was funny though, because that was 3 or 4 flocks that may very well have flared off of her tail wagging. So just another kind of out of the box scenario to think of. Once you've established that you've got the best hide you can possibly get, and sometimes it's not great and you just have to accept what you've got, but once you have gotten to that point where you've eliminated the issue of being hidden as best you can, then it's time to start looking at decoys. Now, personally, you guys have heard a lot of what I've talked about as far as spread size and shape and that sort of thing. I really like to avoid the human looking shapes, the standard J hooks, the big U's, the donut. While those are all great spreads that are good shapes and they're very effective at times, they can also be less organic. So I try to run stuff that looks like what geese would do, and I don't mean to make that sound as obvious as I do, but basically something that doesn't look man-made. Running along an edge of a field with some loose family groups trickling out towards the downwind side, that's one of my favorites. Or even just family groups here and there, and you're sitting in or just adjacent to one of the larger family groups. Something else that I like to do is hide in a place where birds wouldn't expect me, like in a crosswind scenario, or maybe towards the downwind side of the spread where birds, their attention's up here, and they're worried about things up there. But if I can hide with one or two people, you can have some real success sitting in the downwind third of your spread. As birds will come down, they'll get low, they'll work up there. You can call them back, they'll circle around, you can get quiet and let them divert their attention back upwind of you. But there's all sorts of tricks. Anyway, that's kind of what I like to do to start with, but you can always adjust the density of your spread, the size of your spread. My personal thing that I like to do when things get tough, my first instinct is always loosen stuff up. Make things more open, clear some alleys, and I don't mean just some looser spots of decoys. I mean full-blown 15 to 30 yard wide clean swaths where there are no decoys around, where a bird could fly up there, not feel like they have to fly over a decoy to work in, and it gives them kind of a comfortable escape route. You've heard Kyle and I talk about escape routes and places birds like an easy out where they don't feel trapped. So oftentimes we'll create that full-blown gap that goes all the way through the spread. And you know, if birds are working up towards one spot and it looks like they're hitting a wall, clear that out, open it up, give them a lane to come right over us. Even if they're not in the mood to come down and finish, like on a no-wind day or days where they're going to circle a bunch like that, if you clear out a lane that comes directly over your hide, odds are you're going to get some really high-quality shots at that 15 to 20 yard mark coming straight over the top, and those are some of the highest percentage shots you're going to be able to take. So that is one of the first things that I'll do. When I'm talking about loosening decoys up, sometimes I'll go through our more dense areas, or especially the areas where we're hiding if we're lying in the spread, and I will just start picking up every third or every fourth decoy and getting them away, because it's natural human instinct when we want to be hidden to put more stuff on top of us. And while that works sometimes, especially with vegetation, it really doesn't work when the majority of your decoys, or the most dense part of your decoys, is right where you're hiding. You could have this nice, big, beautiful spread that covers 200 yards. Say we're hunting snow geese or something. And where you're trying to hide under a bunch of socks or something, you just have super, super dense right there, and it looks like someone took a thick line of white toothpaste and went through your really nice looking spread. So keep that stuff in mind. You can loosen things up. You can still stay hidden without drawing a bunch of attention to yourself. So that would be something to do with density. The other thing, if I've got it set up, say we're hunting, imagine you've got a really windy day. You've set a fairly small spread, or at least not a very deep spread, because you didn't want birds working downwind, and all of a sudden you find that they really are going to circle, and that they want to hang over top of you, and you know, it's just not something that they're comfortable with. That's a great time to adjust the size of the spread too. And while you may not have extra decoys just sitting there for you to grab and to go add more, take something, go back to that taking every second or every third decoy approach, throw some family groups way downwind, give them something to take a longer, deeper turn over to go and inspect, and then work up, just to kind of keep their focus off of where you're hiding. And again, 80% of what I'm doing with decoys and with hides is all to just keep the hide and keep us out of their field of vision. always keeping that in mind. We're really not trying to just be invisible, but mainly be in a position where birds aren't looking directly at us. Works out really, really well the majority of the time. Okay, so we've adjusted our calling and our flagging right off the bat. And that's something that we can go to fairly quickly. Then we've double checked our hide, made sure that that's all good, and that we've done the best we can with what we've got to be well hidden. Then we can start worrying about the spread, and then from there, the super, super fine details. This is where you start getting into some ticky-tacky stuff. Guys really prefer one thing or another, and getting into superstitions about, certain things. A lot of guys really, especially like where I grew up here in Colorado, folks are really concerned with birds facing into the wind. Now, when the wind's blowing 15, 20 plus, it does start to make a difference. Now, that doesn't mean that, especially when I'm running my silhouette spreads, that I'm sitting there turning everything to where all the heads are into the wind. But that may be something that may make a difference here or there. So something to keep in mind. Another thing would be having sleepers in your spread. Some guys really don't like having sleepers in their spread because it says that birds are resting here versus actively feeding. And early in the morning, birds are probably going to be landing in the field and start feeding pretty actively, as opposed to where later in the morning, some of those sleepers may actually be a little bit more accurate where you've got some birds in there. Everybody's got their own opinions. Some people prefer the sleepers because it makes things look more content. Where I'm going with this is all preference. Beyond that, start experimenting. Sometimes, heck, I've had plenty of days, again, here in Colorado, I'm hunting lessers, and birds are breaking down and they're working, but they're just not working right. And I've got a mixed dark and white spread because there's snow geese in the area. I can't tell you, it's gotten to the point where that is the first thing that I pick up now after I've gone through my progression. The first thing that I will do after that is start picking up white decoys. And I've had a decent number of days where just picking up the snow goose decoys has turned my average lesser hunt into a lights out, finish out the rest of your limit in a hurry kind of hunt. So just little stuff like that, personal preference, and the only way that you can develop these personal preferences is by experimenting and trying different things. Now, I want to touch on one more thing here for those of you who have stuck around and watched, and that is why it's important to experiment on your own and why it's important for you to go and try things. Now, I get asked all sorts of questions, and I get emails and very, very in-depth stuff. There's a lot of great stuff. People have provided me with a lot of information and asked me basically what I do. A lot of times I get Onyx screenshots with pictures and stuff circled, and the wind's here, and here's the roost, and here's the roost. How would you set up? Well, I'm more than happy to tell you what I would do most of the time, but at a certain point, it's not really benefiting you to just ask what I would do and for me to just kind of give you a canned idea of, here, this is what you need to do, give it a shot, it'll probably work, and then hit me up the next week for another one and the next week for another one. At some point, you got to go out there and you got to try stuff yourself and figure out not just how to make it happen, but why it happened. That's what gets me so interested in waterfowling, is not necessarily being successful all the time and that we shot a limit or that we had a great hunt, but how and why. It's more fun for me to be able to understand just what it was that triggered those birds, why they came in there and why they gave us a look versus the guy down the road or the guy on 200 yards back on this public spot who came in at sunrise. There's a lot of different variables to it. And while I do want to help everybody as much as I can, I'm not saying that I'm not here to help. But if I give you some sort of an answer like, I would set up something loose and make sure you're well hidden, maybe consider this edge, or is there something more specific that I can help you with? Don't take it as I don't want to help you out, but more so, you kind of got to feel things out on your own and try some different things. Don't get stuck in a rut. Don't try the same thing over and over. If it's something that feels weird, give it a shot. Sometimes that's the key. And if you're really concerned about learning some new ideas, honestly, one of the best tips that I've got for you is to try hunting with a local guide. Whether it's someone in your immediate area or a couple hours away, you don't have to tell them where you hunt. I understand a lot of you guys are hunting permission stuff in a world where most things are leased, and you really don't want someone to come in and start trying to hunt your stuff. So you don't have to invite them out to your place and have them guide you on your spot and show you just how you should do stuff, but rather go hunt with them. Take 2-3 days and go hunt with them in a couple different places and just watch them. Watch what they do. Ask some questions. I've met a whole bunch of guides in my career, and there's very, very few of them who wouldn't be willing to help someone if they asked a genuine question and were curious how they could improve their hunting. Say, heck, maybe even throw it out there. You don't have to tell them where you're hunting, but say, hey, man, I do a lot of hunting on my own, and I'm just curious. I've had a lot of issues getting birds to come down past that 60-yard marker, or maybe they're flaring out here. And while guides aren't the end all be all, and guys who hunt waterfowl day in and day out, while they know a lot and they've got a ton of experience with things, they may not have all the right answers, but they're going to have an answer. They're going to have an opinion, and they may have had some of these experiences that they're willing to share with you that'll get you going in the right direction. So even if you're an experienced waterfowler, you've been doing things a long time, maybe things in your area have changed and have gotten more difficult, your success has gone down, reach out to a local guide service. Call them, book a day or two. You don't have to go out there and book 10, 15 hunts. I'm not saying sell your spread and just, go hunt with guide services, but even with the extensive guiding and hunting across the country I've done prior to doing all this work for Dive Bomb and going and meeting all these guides, I felt pretty darn good about it, and I still do. I feel comfortable that I can go about anywhere in the country and have success with scouting and finding a place and, putting a hunt together. But I can't tell you how many little tips, tricks, tidbits I have been able to pick out and pull from guides all over the country who have some really great opinions and some great experiences. So don't be shy to use your guide services in your area as a resource. I hope this has helped a lot with you guys. Again, just a quick recap. If birds are flaring, that's the time. Get out of your blind, go out, check stuff out, look for something that's dramatically wrong that you need to fix, you need to change. Decoys laid over, able to see in the blinds. Maybe ask guys to get into the position. Like, all right, guys, pretend like we got birds coming, get just how you were. And then you might see, heck, maybe someone's super reflective sunglasses or something. But that's the time to really hurry and get something fixed, because that could be making all the difference in the world. When birds are just kind of moseying on and not really doing just right, again, calling and flagging will be the first things that we're trying to adjust mid-flock. And then from there, we're going to look at the hide, making sure that you're hitting as best you can, even if it's not perfect, doing your best. And then we're going to start getting over to decoys, density and size of your spread, and then we'll get into the superstitious or more technical stuff that's typically preference. While you can pick up a lot of good stuff, it may or may not really make a difference, but at this point, we're just trying anything we can to fix it. I hope this has helped. If you guys have any further questions, please, as always, feel free to drop them below in the comments. I'm glad to get back and start another off-season with a Field Facts with Forrest episode here. Thank you guys for following along throughout the winter. It's been really awesome, and we have a whole lot of really great videos coming. I'm going to have a lot more educational stuff coming as well. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time on Field Facts with Forrest.